How are you doing? So now we're moving on to QuickBooks Online Advanced Certification. We're going to be starting with Section 1, Advanced Categorization. The topics covered in this section are subaccounts, sources and targets, classes, locations, subcustomers, and projects. So in this second exam, we're going to be looking more in depth of some of the extra features that you'll see. And most of these features you'll see I mentioned, you'll find in the Plus and Advanced accounts for the QuickBooks Online. So what are subaccounts? We can create subaccounts, subclasses, sublocations, and subcustomers. You can specify any of these for hierarchical categorization. This allows you to group and report showing different levels. You have 5 hierarchical levels, including the parent. Notice I have an asterisk there because the question might ask for how many hierarchical levels excluding the parent. So if the question says excluding the parent, you would say therefore 4 hierarchical levels. So 4 hierarchical levels, excluding the parent. If it's including the parent, then it would be 5. And I gave you an example here so you can visualize this. So let's say I'm going to have my parent account utilities. I can have under that one parent account 4 sub-accounts, which would be gas, electric, water, and phone. With these sub-accounts, data appears indented under the parent account on any report. They provide more details of income and expenses in a simple and straightforward way. You can collapse or expand individual groups of accounts depending on the chevron direction next to the group. Sources and targets. Source data is primary data of a transaction. There's only one source per transaction. Source data or source accounts are always balance sheet accounts. So you see I have there both of those in bold. That means make sure you have those in your notes. So there's only one source per transaction, and source data or source accounts are always balance sheet accounts. Target data is information on how the transaction is distributed into the general ledger, and there could be several target lines per transaction. The transaction journal. After inputting a transaction, you may need to double check the debit and credit entries. What is the best or quickest way to do this? The answer would be open the transaction and then look at the transaction journal from within the More Options link. So you go back into that transaction, you go to the bottom and you click on More Options and you look through the transaction journal to double check those debit and credit entries. Classes are turned on. Okay, so now we're talking about classes. Classes are turned on in the advanced settings section of the accounts and settings, you know, where you go to the gear icon and you select accounts and settings. And then when you go there, you'll be offered 2 options. Assign a class to each row in a transaction. And the other option is assign a class to the entire transaction. This is where all the target lines are assigned to the specific class. Classes are used to categorize income and expense transactions from different sectors within a business. You can assign multiple classes to a transaction. The unspecified column on a profit and loss by class represents transactions that have not had a class specified. This will make more sense if you go to the training section in the self-paced section 1. They'll actually give you the visualization of the profit and loss account with that column there, the unspecified column. So again, you can assign multiple classes to a transaction, and the unspecified column on a profit and loss by class represents a transaction that has not yet had a class specified for it. Now we're looking at assigning locations. So switch on location tracking. You would then go to your account and settings through the gear icon. You'd go to Advanced tab, which is all the way in the bottom. Then you would select categories and you would check that box for locations. You can now choose the type of location used for the location tracking category in your QBO company by selecting from several labels that'll be listed there: business, department, division, location, property, store, and territory. Once you have had classes and locations activated, they then will be found in your all lists section. We talked about that in earlier videos, how to access your all lists. Location tracking. You can only have one location per transaction, unlike classes, which you can have several of them. Oh, which I wrote that in. I thought I was making that side note. Unlike classes, which could be assigned to each line of the transaction. You cannot allocate different locations to different lines in a transaction. Location tracking, therefore, is not used to categorize a different location to each row in an invoice. So that might be, let's say, a true and false question. So if they don't have the word not in there, then it'd be false. So location tracking is not used to categorize a different location to each row in an invoice. Location tracking is not available. It's only available in QBO Plus and Advanced. Whenever I say plus, obviously, you should know that means it automatically is also available in Advanced. And see the little yellow box there on some of these slides, I might have that little yellow box just letting you know I'm giving this information because it's covered in the training section, but I haven't come across anybody who's provided me with questions on this particular topic. I just want to cover it. Job and sales tracking. So job costing is measuring the cost of a specific job, tracking the time spent, expenses, and profits made. Many businesses want to track jobs and their expenses. To do this, you go to your account and settings, and then you go down to the expense tab, and you check the check boxes labeled bills and expenses. The options listed there are as follows. So you would see show items table on expense and purchase form. And the other option is track expenses and items by client. The second option will add a client column to the purchase transactions. Once you've selected these options, you can now assign purchase transactions against jobs. To purchase transactions, you can assign a job to are checks, bills, expenses, vendor credits, and credit card credits. This also doesn't have a specific question on this particular problem. Sub-customer jobs and sales tracking. So service providers should create detailed customers and sub-customer files, and they can create a sub-customer. This would be for a client that has several different customers on different levels. So you then, to create this, you would go to account settings, you go to the advanced tab, and under the other preferences section, you would select the customer label, and then you would have 8 selection choices there. And then I have your example, you might decide to select the title clients. So then in the clients tab in the sales section, in the sales center, you would there be able to select new client. And when filling out the details in that pop-up window that comes up, you can then put the owner as the parent client and then the manager, let's say, as the sub-client. So instead of the other term you might be familiar with, the sub-customer, now you're going to be using the term client. So you would have the owner as the parent client and the manager as a sub-client. And you would do that by selecting the appropriate boxes there. You also have the billing options. Now, I have seen people put different questions in here with this one, where with the sub-customers, you can select bill this client, or you could select bill with parent, which in this case would be the owner. And here's an example. This might be outdated. I'm not really sure. I found this when I was looking at answering one of another questions. I said, oh, I want this for my PowerPoint, just to show you that when I said the checkbox, you would select that this is a sub-customer. And then here you would select you want to bill with the parent, the actual owner. So here's the question. What are 2 ways you can customize the profit and loss report to track the profitability of products and services for a specific job or jobs? The answers are by displaying columns by customers and by filtering for one or more specific customers or sub-customers. Projects. Projects are set up by default, meaning you don't have to activate them if you already have a QBO Plus or Advanced account, but you can change the settings. So to change the settings, you would go to Account and Settings via the gear icon. You would select the Expenses tab and then go to Bills and Expense section. And the setting options are, and see that little yellow, and I said, no, the setting options, make sure you please have this in your notes when you take the test. The setting options for projects are show items table on expense and purchase forms, track expenses and items by customer, and make expenses and items billable. Selecting appropriate listing options. A client has several landlords, tenants, and locations. Which method of monitoring income and expenditure would be most appropriate, especially if the client needs to recharge expenses for costs incurred to maintain properties? So I got 2 extra questions, and I want to give a shout out to Bright Desk. Thank you very much for that. The answer to this would be sub-customer. The reason why I went with sub-customer was because first, In this situation, because you have landlords and tenants and locations, you probably want to specify whether it's bill with client or bill with owner in all the different subcategories. And then also that you could use the separate addresses. You cannot have both sub-customers and projects. So what is needed to convert a sub-customer to a project? The project needs to be turned on, as we went over. Sub-customers that are only one level deep, so you can have sub-customers. And then you cannot have both, so you can have the option of deleting your sub-customers and recreating them as projects. Another added question, thanks again, shout out to BrightDesk, was this one. Which of the features mentioned in this section that I just went over, locations, classes, and so on, projects and sub-customers, which one of them allows you to set up a unique address, phone number, and email address for invoices? The answer to that is locations. So that ends section 1. Good luck on your exam.